Good evening. Welcome to Prophecy Roundtable. You know, there's a passage in Revelation that talks about how the dragon is going to go after those who have the testimony of Jesus and keep his commandments. Now, look, I'll be the first to admit I'm not doing it perfectly, but it's at least on my radar. I want to do what the Lord wants me to do, right? So we're going to talk tonight about what does it mean to keep the commandments? How does that factor in to the end times? We're going to probably take a look. I think we're predestined to take a look at Calvinism and what is the problem with that. We're going to have a lot of fun tonight. We have a special guest, Luke Abafi, on tonight. I'm excited to dig into his testimony and get his perspective on Christianity and times. What does it mean to keep the commandments? How do we walk out this faith? If you guys have questions, make sure to put them in the chat. Let's get going. I'm so excited. So hello, everyone. Good to see you guys. So glad that you're here. Luke, welcome. It's always a pleasure to have you on the show. So
Thank you.
Awesome. Yeah. Where do you live, Luke?
I live in Ohio, Southern Ohio, south of Columbus a little bit.
Nice. I grew up in this state. You know this one. Okay.
I
know your northern neighbor, we kind of turned our noses down toward people in Ohio because we felt superior. Okay. Not that I'm from Superior, but I felt superior. Okay.
The Ohio State.
I know. I don't know why. It was such a weird thing. We're like, oh, Ohio. And I was just like, why do we even feel that way? But
it's the football. It's the foosball.
There you go. That's got to be it. That's got to be it. That's awesome. Well, welcome, Luke. We're glad that you are here. All right. So we kind of were teasing a few things before the show. Tell me why I'm supposed to believe in Calvinism or not. I love that topic. That's a fun topic. All right. So for people that may not really know what's up with Calvinism, Calvinism basically teaches that God chose just a couple people because he's so nice to go to heaven, and everyone else, he just didn't choose them. Okay. It's kind of like, you're in a big restaurant and I go up to like three people and say, I'm choosing to pay your bill. And everybody else, I'm not going to pay your bill. And, hey, that's just the way it is. In this case, though, we're talking by paying the bill, God is letting three people go to heaven. And the rest of them, he's just like, I'm just not going to pay your bill. And so, sorry, you get to go to the other place. There's a real big problem with that when it comes to Calvinism. If you guys are interested, I did do an article, Why God Did Not Elect Calvinists. I think all the Calvinists loved it, as far as I know. But I think that's a huge issue. And I think when it comes to kind of doctrine, I think Calvinism is as messed up as Jehovah's Witnesses or Mormonism or any of these things, because it's really putting a huge barrier between people and God. It's taking God and painting him in a picture that is so weird and ugly, and I think it distorts the view of God tremendously. So I'd love to get your thoughts on that, Luke.
Well, okay, to an extent I agree with you too, and I read the article that you wrote and I loved it, and I just want to play Calvin's advocate, I guess, a little bit. I should say that I think that there's a lot of solid doctrine within this Reformed theology camp, and some of these tulip things maybe are almost right, and they base them on verses that make it sound like, yeah, there's predestined, pre-elected, pre it's
Twisting.
all there. So I understand why they get there. And full disclosure, my wife went to a small Christian school, from elementary all the way through high school, and it was the Reformed thing. So I've heard her arguments about that quite a bit.
Fair enough. Well, so the reason I wrote that article some years ago is because I was teaching a theology class, and it started off with kind of this age-old debate. Okay, is it who's right, the Calvinists or the Arminianists? And I'm like, I think they're both wrong. Because when it comes to the question of who did God elect, what they've done is they've taken these passages that are speaking about God's election of a people, and they're now applying it to the individual. And I think that is what is terribly wrong with it. And so I would argue that both Calvinism and Arminianism are both starting from the wrong starting point. They have the wrong foundation. And this is where you have to go back even further to understand. And when I wrote that paper, the fog was just beginning to lift for me, and I had not quite seen the full picture yet. And this gets into another discussion. We don't necessarily want to go there tonight, but it does get into the whole topic of the Commonwealth of Israel and how the one nation was split into two, Judah and Israel. Israel got divorced, disinherited, no longer my
But
people.
they were predestined to be divorced, right?
Well, we're not going there.
It's stand-up Sunday night.
I know, right. And so then God's put them back together. So that's kind of the bigger story behind the whole Calvinist debate, I would argue. And yeah, so again, but these are topics that we can go on and on. I think God is slowly opening our eyes to these things, and is it a sign of the end times? I don't know. I'd like to think so, but
It's a sign that certain dogma will break down during the end times, guys. There are certain things that just aren't going to work. If you want to claim that some people are predestined and then some people are double predestined to be raptured, it gets kind of crazy after a while. It's like, well, then why did I birth my babies if they're just going to hell? There's got to be a point where I get to choose Yeshua and go to him, and if it's all him just saying, well, I birthed you for hell, what's the point? Why would I go out and witness to people? Why? Like Luke?
Well, you know what their answer is. Their answer is we can't know, so we just have to witness to everybody. And then eventually the Spirit will awaken the ones that are good. But I totally agree with you guys. This is the hard part. I think we all agree. Like Deuteronomy maybe 26 is the one that says you got to choose life. Set before you blessing and curse. Choose life. So I do think choice is. Here's my stance. My stance is that both predestination and free will are true. I think we choose him and we choose life, but I also know that he somehow says he predestined people, some vessels for like destruction and some vessels for glory. I don't understand it. What that means, I think, is that he knows what we'll choose, but he allows us to make the decision.
Hey, Luke, can I offer this as far as that passage, which in Romans 9, Paul is obviously quoting from the prophets. And I believe it's Jacob is representative of corporate election. In other words, all those who are grafted into Israel, all those who become citizens of Israel, they are therefore elect, just like the epistle to the ecclesia at Ephesus. They were all in covenant. They were former pagans. They were now being encouraged not to let pagans or even maybe some Jews judge them because they're keeping the feast, they're only eating food, et cetera, et cetera. So at that point in time, he's writing to the elect because they've already chosen to enter into that covenant. And so I look at it more like as a corporate election. All of Israel, ever since the beginning of time, is elect. Everybody who is not Israel, not elect. You're not in covenant. And I think if we look at it from a corporate election standpoint, it makes Romans 9 and those passages that Paul is quoting make 100% sense. What are your thoughts?
Yeah. Great point. Yes, because in that trunk of Israel, or Yeshua, whatever, you can be grafted in and grafted out. So you're right. The Commonwealth of Israel, quote unquote, is elect, but you can be chopped off or grafted on. So yeah, it's not like individuals. That's a good point.
Yeah, it's just like the natural branches that have so far, at least to this day, that have not placed their faith in Yeshua, they would be, like you said, they would be cut off. They would not be elect right now. Yah has his redemptive plan for Judah. But as far as I can see right now, Judah won't corporately become elect again until Zechariah 12 is fulfilled, until Joel 3 is fulfilled, and then we'll see all Israel being saved. But Anyway, that's my thoughts
So,
on
Luke,
election.
let me throw you a verse that will contest the election argument a little bit. And Scott already cited it. It's Revelation 12:17. Then the dragon was angry with the woman and went off to make war with the rest of her children. Those who keep the commandments, that's a verb, that's tereho, and Doug knows his Greek pretty well, but that should be shamar in the Hebrew, okay? His commandments, his mitzvot, and of God, and hold to the testimony of Jesus. So hold. So these are verbs, these are action activities. And so it's not that you're elected, you have to keep on. You have to shamar. Doug, would you say shamar is a verb?
It's a verb, yes.
The verb. Okay. So you're doing something. So Luke, would you agree with those comments or would you disagree with Yeshua?
I would.
I'm sorry.
Wow.
I was predestined to say that.
Just so you know, Joel likes to give leading questions.
Yes, I do.
Okay. I mean, I'm not a lawyer, but even I know that. Okay. That they're leading questions. Like our last guest, he said, right? Don't you think right? And I'm like,
right?
Oh, talk about leading the witness. This is
crazy. Oh, yeah.
Joel,
I was pre-law.
Let him answer.
No, but I agree with him. This is the problem with this conversation is that I will agree with you guys. But I like it's actually great because you're giving good ammunition to defend the perspective.
Sure.
And I like that it doesn't say that the Satan's going to make war against the elect. It says he's going to make war against those who do these things, keep the commandments, and have the testimony of Yeshua. So, yeah, good point.
Okay, we're having fun. So, in 13:7 through, this is good. 13:7 through 10 should be right here. Pardon me. And was given, and it was also allowed to make war on the saints and conquer them. It was given authority over every tribe and people and language and nation, and all the inhabitants of the earth will worship it. Everyone whose name has not been written from the foundation of the world in the book of the Lamb of life of the Lamb that was slaughtered. Let any man who has an ear listen. If you are to be taken captive, into captivity you will go. If you kill with the sword you must be killed. Here is a call for the endurance and the faith of the saints. Is that a verb again? I mean, is that endurance and faith?
Yeah. Luke? Yeah, man. I feel bad for the Calvinists at this point, though, because I'm probably not doing a great job defending their perspective. I know that they might mention... Anyway, yeah, I agree.
Did I lead you again?
What's that?
Maybe, did I lead you again?
Maybe, but if we're all in agreement, I guess it's okay.
It was meant to be, apparently.
Yes, I'm sure they would bring up something about that Lamb's Book of Life and how that was written before, that just has to do with, for my opinion.
Oh, you're right. They would go that direction. They would say, well, it's predestined. I mean, you're already written in, and can you be written out of the Lamb's Book?
Yeah, you can be blotted out.
Okay. Yep. Moses says that.
If it's the same book, you can be blotted out of one book. Is that the same book as the Lamb's Book of Life? I can't remember. I know you. It's like, I think it's just called "Lest Your Name Be blotted out of the book." Maybe it's this Lamb's Book of Life. Maybe it's a different book. Maybe there are multiple. How many books are there? How many of them do we have to be in?
I think 3.
Book of Life, Book of Death. About, Luke, what is it that you really enjoy when it comes to ministry and the Bible? Like, kind of, what's your calling, or where do you see yourself really fitting in? Or, you had a message for people.
Okay. That's a good question. I never have seen have labeled what I'm doing as ministry, really. I even though I feel like it has ministered to people, I've always been interested in telling stories of people. And I used to write fiction, and I still do, actually. And so I like telling stories, but what I've worked on in the public sphere has all been nonfiction, and for the most part, and it's all been, telling people stories in documentaries or other things. And so I guess telling people stories in some way, shape, or form via the podcast, documentaries, and slowly when I was kind of jarred out of just mainstream Christian doctrine, it was such a world shattering experience for me that I thought that story was the most important story to tell. And I thought once I told that with this documentary called The Way, then great, I can move on and do other things. But I've gotten stuck in this sphere because I keep wanting to make stuff about this story and tell the story. So I think there's weirdly still more to talk about.
I'm trying to get you to work with me on one about understanding who that once we're in covenant, we're Israel. And then I believe, Luke, once people can understand that they're Israel, not this replacement theology nonsense, grafted into Israel, then the entire front of the book makes 100% sense, and you're not trying to explain away these commandments that are given to Israel forever, because you understand you are Israel. And so I just think it if people would allow themselves to remove the blindfold just briefly, or take the fingers out of the ears on some of these things, because it's so you start talking like this, like Heather, a nice lady, but all she could hear, Doug, was replacement theology, and we're not even talking about anybody replacing Judah. But that's an example of a very smart, bright lady that who's still with us today. So she didn't get raptured.
She predicted the rapture on the 8th.
Yeah,
I checked. She's still there. She's on vacation. Well, she was raptured to Florida. So.
But anyway, that would be an example of she just unlearning unlearning that only the Jews are Israel. That's going to be hard for her. That's going to be hard for, and I'm starting to understand it's really hard to.
It is
unlearn.
It's a paradigm shift, and paradigm shifts are they're hard by definition. Luke, what year did you make the documentary The Way?
2016.
2016. That's right. That's right. Yeah. Wow. So I have a congregation called The Way. I think it's a great name.
Hey, great minds think alike.
I know.
Man.
I'll tell you. That's really awesome. Yeah.
How did your wife and family receive the news that you were switching over?
I had just gotten married right as I was kind of coming into this understanding of the Bible. And so Katie was not on board originally when we got married, not till like 3 months into our marriage. And that's when she realized, oh yeah, she agrees with me. But it was not because of any arguments that I made or any points that were good that I had, because she thought all the new things I was doing and all the questions that I was asking about, accepted theology were like non-questions. They were already answered by her perfect framework, her perfect doctrinal framework, her perfect reformed doctrinal framework. And so she probably maybe never would have agreed until she had a dream, and the dream made her aware that.
Tell us about the dream.
Okay. I thank Yah for the dream, because it did a lot of work for me. The dream was, she was sitting around like this small group meeting, because during college she was heavily involved in all the Christian campus stuff going on and outreach, and they would always have these meetings and they would discuss the Bible. And it was her and all of her college friends there, and she saw in the circle of people was this like demonic looking beast just sitting there on one of the folding chairs like everyone else, and everyone was fine with having the beast there. And she said to her friend, she was like, is no one noticing this? What's going on? How come everyone's okay with this being here? And it freaked her out, and she woke up and she realized that she had been calling things that were sin not sin, and she didn't realize that until the dream. She had been welcoming sin, things that the Bible labels as sin or transgression of the law, as just okay. And so that was like something she needed to understand, I guess, to realize that the law is not like done away with and abolished at the cross, but is relevant to our modern day lives. So that's the dream.
That's very powerful. That's very cool.
Cool.
It's crazy.
What kind of response have you gotten from people about the documentary? People that maybe were surprised by it, and would you change anything since you made it? What would you do differently if you had to make a 2.0?
It's funny, that process of making the documentary and subsequent endeavors was the beginning of, for me, feeling and noticing like the hand of God or Yah working in my life in a day-to-day way, where trying to line up interviews or having things just fall into place or be blocked irreparably from happening. And it's like I approached that documentary in from a totally different perspective. I was going to do a totally different story, and all of it got changed. And so I think that I still to this day would not change anything. Would I change anything? Maybe a little better audio here or there, maybe a little slightly better color correction, things like that. Besides technical stuff, I would not change the content in the documentary, because I think that it was guided by Yah. I do. Same thing, I think, with this book that I wrote, and same thing with the Christmas question, I think. I don't know about the tracts, maybe. I tried to take the book, and then I have these tracts that are like chick tracts, and they're just meant to answer why I am doing things slightly different than my mainstream Christian brethren. Like, I'm doing Saturday Sabbath. I'm eating clean, biblically clean. I'm wearing tassels on my clothing. I'm not celebrating Christmas and Easter, and I'm instead celebrating the biblical holidays of Yah. So these things are all addressed in these tracts. And so anyway, I wasn't trying to pitch the tracts, but I was just saying that I don't know. Anyway, maybe I felt a little bit of this hand of God in those, but mostly it was with the way and then the truth.
Wow.
Where do you think this movement is going?
Well, I think if we want to get into eschatology, I guess.
Well, short term, long term, yeah.
I think that the end goal, I mean, well, people will continue to wake up to this because this is the next step in the faith. The verse that kind of this episode is based around about the serpent making war on those who obey the commandments and have the testimony of Yeshua is kind of proof that the movement will continue to at least survive, if not grow, until his return. So I think that is what will happen. I personally think it will continue to grow, and maybe some people will stick around, and maybe some people will fall back away. I think.
Well, I would say from Deuteronomy 4 and 30. I mean, I think we're seeing the early part of prophecy being fulfilled as his people are returning to his way all over the globe right now. Like, not just in America, but in Europe and Africa and Asia. There are people that are just all of a sudden, wait a minute, I'm going to rest on Shabbat. I'm going to do his feast. I'm going to quit eating these things and wearing the tzitzit. And other than a few other minor commandments, our Christian brothers and sisters in solid churches teach what sin is, other than these, his moedim and what is food. I mean, those. What's been your experience, Luke? Is that the most resistance you get? It's like they put you in a cult.
I guess a lot of people don't know how to react to this, and they want to know what box to put you in that they're already familiar with. And so the boxes they usually have are Seventh-day Adventist or Jewish or something like that. And most haven't heard of the Worldwide Church of God, or that would be a box. So, and then if they've heard of Hebrew roots, that's a box. And they're like, oh, you're Hebrew roots. Okay. you have all this crazy beliefs, or oh, you're Adventist, and so I guess the pushback has been mostly getting them to understand I see myself as a Christian that thinks there's more ways to sin than most Christians do.
Oh, you might be surprised. Baptists have a lot of different ways you can sin.
And I would,
I don't smoke, I don't chew, I don't go with girls that do, right? Those are just a few.
Movies, can't go to movies. No dances.
No, that's right. No dancing.
To answer the question even more about what's been the most biggest pushback, I think the hardest thing to get people, mainstream believers, to understand that I believe is that I'm not saved by keeping the law. And so I think that is weirdly a hang up that doesn't, because the problem is all the parts of the Bible that explain our relationship to the law, namely, I mean, our modern relationship, namely all the epistles of Paul, are so skewed and bastardized by mainstream Christian doctrine that people have no idea what to do with the law. And so they misplace it in all the ways that mainstream doctrine had to misplace it so that they could have a cohesive, like, understanding of the word without having obvious, like, logical holes. And so, right. Yeah, that's the problem. Like, filling, and really, if you get down to it, you have to fill all those holes up in order to make them realize, oh, so that is what the law is. Oh, the law is around ever since the garden, in my opinion. The law is around for mankind's entire journey on earth until earth is gone, and then there's a new law, because the law is just instructions on how the human being should live in this world without and trying to avoid death as much as possible.
I would take it a step further. It's just how things work. I mean, you can look at your car manual and say, well, these are the laws of the car. Or you can say, well, this is just how a car works, and you can abide by those things, or you can ignore them and not change your oil forever and see what happens. You might squeak by another 1,000 or 2,000 miles, even 10,000, but after 50,000 without changing your oil, you're in trouble. And I think if people could just see that these instructions are, this is how the thing works. This is how the world works. This is how, things operate. And we understand it when it comes to physical laws. We understand it really well. But when it comes to so-called spiritual laws, and of course I know the 4 spiritual laws, that's got all messed up. But if we could just understand that it's not that there's spiritual laws and physical laws. It's how the whole thing works, and look, let's take a really easy one. Okay. Let's take murder. Okay. God says, don't do it. Why? Because because God's like, well, first of all, I care about people, but I wanted you to understand, when you murder somebody, it really messes things up, and it's going to mess things up in big ways. Not just that there's a person gone, but now their family is brokenhearted. They want revenge. They want justice. And you have a guilty conscience, and many other things that all happen when we transgress or violate one of these instructions. And I think this is where we spiritualize everything, when it's just, I just see it as like, this is just cause and effect kind of stuff. And if we could understand that, I think it would really solve a lot of our confusion.
Yeah, I think, sorry, I don't want to jump in, but I think that the law is intrinsically, well, the Bible says the law is intrinsically tied to wisdom, and Proverbs kind of maps that out ad nauseum, or whatever. And I think that really, as you were describing the law, you're right. I think the law is a revelation, or at least the revelation that is applicable to mankind, of Yah's wisdom, of some of it. The part that is applicable to us in this state. And when we throw that out, or lessen it, or just ignore a bit of it, or think that some of it is no longer part of the wisdom of Yah, then we lose a lot of good wisdom.
and you end up changing Yah. So
yeah,
that's really again, not to get into a Trinitarian discussion, but that's part of the effect of having a second person son God, that in spite of what Christianity says, this second person Jesus is a different God than the first person Father God, because even though Hebrews says same yesterday, today, and forever, he ends up being different today. And so that's just, I think that's part of what has happened over these last 1,700 years, is by separating God out into different persons, you now have a different person God that changed his Shabbat, that changed his Moedim, that changed what is food. And so, and again, I think we're seeing prophecy being fulfilled. The fact that the house of Israel is still engaging in their same pattern of sins that we've engaged in prior to Jeroboam. I mean, it's so we see this, and in both the house of Israel and the house of Judah, we see Judah repeating the same. They're still engaged in the same sin that they were engaged in at the time that they rejected Yeshua. So, anyway.
Well, I see. I think I see your point. We may have a slightly different understanding of the Trinity or whatever, but we don't have to get into that. I don't think. You know, when we did our interview, I was like, if we're gonna do this, we're gonna find something we disagree on.
Yeah, we kept on talking, and we didn't find anything we disagreed on. We've got to have another interview and find something. Or else.
I know. Yes. No, but I agree that this Marcionism, this idea of evil Old Testament father and good, kind, redeeming New Testament son was the beginning of that weird duality of the creator, which threw a bunch of wrenches into stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So, Luke, when you come with this message to people, like the life movie that you created, and other messages that you kick out to people, how do they receive you? I mean, how do they behave around you? Are they different now? Do they hate you? Do they want to stone you? What happens?
Oh goodness! Well, no. Everyone, no one gives me a hard time, really. I guess. All my mainstream Christian friends know what I believe, and they if they discuss it with me, we went through the phase of where we would discuss things, and I would do all my debating and Torah terrorism and all that, and that's now mostly in the past. I don't do that as much because anyone who didn't like me after that is gone, and anyone who doesn't care is still around. So. It's easier when you hang out with pagans and or Torah people. It's like the heathen doesn't care what you do at all. The Torah person already agrees with you, but the mainstream Christian does not see eye to eye on all the things. So if you're okay with that, great in your friendships.
But they don't call you up on Sabbath and say, "Hey, let's go out for a BLT or let's eat some brats." They don't do that anymore.
They know what I do.
Okay.
Well, and that is. I want to get your thought process on this, Luke. Obviously, I have learned, as you just said, you had your apologetics version ready to explain to them that Acts 10 is not about eating. Sewer rat. It's not about, baked vulture or poached puppies or, sauteed kitty cats. But how long did it take you to learn that no matter what great scriptural arguments you can put together for why he didn't change the food laws or the Sabbath or doing your best to explain that, these are the Moedim of Jesus. These are his feasts. He's the one that created them. How long did it take you to learn that you're not going to be able to argue someone into seeing this?
Too long. It took me too long. Long enough to probably alienate a couple people, sadly.
Mm-hmm.
But now I realize, okay, the Holy Spirit, the Ruach or whatever is really what wakes people up. And that's what woke me up, I suppose. That's what woke my mom up. That's what woke Katie up literally in a dream. So, yeah, I don't think most people can be argued into this. If they're extremely logical and almost autistic, I think you could probably wake them up. But that's kind of what you need You need like a very logical, plotting nerd. That's
Well,
what
and I
you
would
need.
say that logic might have been one reason why when I saw it, I was like, oh, okay. I mean, it was. That's why I don't. Everybody talks about this struggle. I'm like, oh, I've been wrong. You
don't have to be autistic. I'm just kidding. But you just have to be an early adopter. You have to be willing. There's a certain personality type, I think, of people who are early adopters of something that's countercultural, and all those people are in the movie The Big Short. And they all, if you've ever seen that movie, they all knew that they all somehow saw all the lead up to the 2008 financial crisis, and they're like, "Oh my goodness, I know what's going to happen, and I'm going to bet, they make, I'm going to short the market," as they did. And all of those people, interestingly, in my opinion, are similar to a lot of the personality types that first have adopted the Torah stuff, that have been kind of like front leading the Torah movement. Because I think that's how every trend begins. I think a trend begins with the early adopters, and then and they're the ones that are willing to do things that the friends, family, and society thinks are crazy, because they know it's right. Like in the movie The Big Short, the one guy is like, he doesn't wear socks and all this different stuff. He goes around barefoot, and anyway, but he's right. He just knows this stuff. And I think that as time progresses, all trends go from this curve of smaller early adopters to where the trend goes mainstream. And so to get back to that question, Joel, I would say that I think the trend will eventually go mainstream.
You think so? Cool.
Well, that's how all trends go. They either die or they have a spike. Now, will the spike be a watered down version? Hopefully not. And then there's a peak, and then there's the fall off where people don't cling to it, and it ends up equalizing at some point. I don't think that we're at the peak, and I don't think we're to the fall off, although I think people are falling off on the way.
Well, have you seen that some have sort of maybe because they became little Torah terrorists and they didn't see any fruit in their lives whatsoever, and I've seen a swing back towards just some of the Christian traditions like Christmas and Easter. In other words, it's not that big a deal, for the sake of loving others, And again, we don't have to run over and snatch somebody's Easter bunny off their plate, or snatch the ham off the plate. But how do you try, Luke, to get to share what you believe is sin, what I believe the Word teaches is sin, to your Christian brothers without alienating them?
So you mentioned two things. The first thing you mentioned was seeing in this movement people accepting things that they originally were repulsed by, like when they first came into this, like Christmas and stuff. And I think that would be the beginning of being like watering down the thing. I think that's wrong. And I'm sad about that, but I do see that. And then the next question is, I can't remember because my mind got stuck on that one.
Oh, no, that's okay. As far as I think my second one was, how do you try to continue dialogue with some Christian brothers and sisters? In other words, they're in covenant. They've applied the blood of Yeshua. You're not questioning whether they're going to be in the kingdom or not, but do you just sort of use like a gardening approach, try to bring it up occasionally? Like you've had this conversation with a brother 3 years ago. It went nowhere.
This is okay. I got it. This is what's so great about the Torah. It's that there are these laws that affect your lifestyle. And they are obvious that you're keeping them in some way, shape, or form. You're not eating pepperoni when people order pizza together. You're not going wherever to the movies on Shabbat. And so your life, your life speaks about it, whether you want it to or not. And so even if you don't on purpose set aside time with your Christian brethren to debate things, they will know and notice. And if they don't know or notice, then they'll slowly notice over time, if they know you well enough, that you live differently. And so the coolest thing for me one of the coolest things about accepting, acting out as many laws as I can that I think are applicable to me, is that I was able to witness to people in general more because I was doing things that are not normal in 21st century America. So yeah. So I guess by living that out, I continue the witness to my, and some of them joke about it. And they're like, oh yeah, you don't eat pork, or oh la 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 la, and I haven't ran around and like debated them or given them tracts, but maybe I should.
And my friend the other day says, well, I was eating brisket. He goes, there's pork in that too, right? So they like to have fun with me, my heathen friends, my college friends,
Yes.
So here's a question that's come up. This is Brook of Living Water. What do you think about chatnez? Is 65% cotton and 45% spandex prohibited, or is it just wool and linen?
I have opinions.
You have opinions, okay? Because I think this is an important question. I know this is very, very particular, but when we start keeping the commandments, obviously there's going to be differences of interpretation about, tzitzit. I mean, some people got them down below their knees. Some people don't have them at all. Some people think chatnez is a thing. Some people don't. So I'd love to hear your opinion on that, please.
I'm trying to think back to the verse. I know 119 lands on it's just linen and wool mixed. I think chatnez means linen wool. If I may be wrong.
It's a word that only appears once in Scripture, and it's used of linen and wool. It's in Leviticus. Oh gosh, what is it? 19, I think it is. I think it's Leviticus 19, yeah. And so you're not supposed to mix. It specifically says don't mix those two things.
And there's two occurrences of this not mixing fabric, right? And I think in one of them it says such as linen and wool.
That's a translation issue. I mean, it doesn't say in the original. It doesn't say such as. It just said linen and wool. Yeah.
Okay. So that's the King James thing.
So I've been a pastor for a long time. I have a Messianic congregation, and everyone's got an opinion. Everyone is right. I'm just lucky to be there and to talk once in a while. But people come in with established ideas, and they often want me to conform to those ideas. And, I'm always open to listening, right? But I've also studied, and it becomes challenging sometimes, especially here in America, because the American spirit, the independent spirit is alive and well. And like you said, the early adopters, it's true. We have a lot of early adopters. And I think in this movement, I think what plagues us is that while curiosity is wonderful and, hey, let's do what God says, right? But there's also this sense of you're not going to tell me what to do, And so I think it becomes challenging because what we find is we have trouble finding unity. The little discussion I was having on the Telegram group this morning, it just reveals the same sense of, well, I've got it figured out. I have the calendar right. And if you don't, not that this brother was quite saying that, but others have said it, if you don't see the calendar the way I see it, then I'm not going to hang out with you. If you, God forbid, should go to a movie on Shabbat, well, clearly that's breaking it. Right. And so everyone kind of has their own red line. That's what I would suggest. And because we all have sort of this red line of, how it's supposed to be interpreted. And of course, we're all convinced that the way I'm interpreting it is the correct way. and that did come up in this conversation earlier. It was, I think this could be our undoing, unfortunately, because we tend to become the very Pharisees that we often denounce. We're of course happy and a little bit proud that we've made it this far. We've discovered all these things and that, we're doing what God said to do. And yet we can then throw people under the bus if they're not doing it according to how we think. So I don't know. I guess I would like your thoughts on that, and if there's any solution that you might see as to how we can bring in more unity. So
Sure. I mean, yeah, definitely. We shouldn't get dogmatic on these little things. These are the branches. They aren't the trunk. People, the trunk is what's your perspective on this? No, the trunk is not your perspective on the verse. Your trunk is, should this verse apply? That's the trunk. Do these verses, do these Bible verses, do these guidance, these bits of guidance from the Creator still apply to our life? That's part of the trunk. I think yes, they do. And then how we interpret it, that is not. That becomes branches, because people may land one way and may land the other way. As long as they're doing so, being fully convinced in their mind, I think that that's the best that we can do, because it will be the same thing for calendar. It'll be the same thing for this. So I would say there's this, phrase in the essentials, unity, in the non-essentials. I can't even remember the phrase, grace or something. You know what I'm talking about.
Right.
And
right.
that's kind of what I think would help if people didn't make branches into the trunk. But I would say one more thing about the clothing. I think if people think, oh, it's fine, it's just linen and wool, which no one even wears anymore because we're not in the 1700s, then why don't they wear those things and see if they feel any better or differently? I mean, I think that maybe it's in my mind. My brother says that whenever I think something, it's just, I'm not a hypochondriac, but whenever I think something's affecting me, it does. And so if I ever wear even 100% polyester, I will feel not good. And it's probably just in my brain, I'm sure. But
what's the frequency?
This is another thing I'm very interested in. So there's been some, I would say, okay, there's been studies and tests done on fabrics that try to measure the frequency of the fabrics to see if it resonates with the, I guess, healthy resonance of our body and or our different organs. This is well beyond my pay grade, because I have no idea how you can measure the frequency of things like fabric, or if you can. I'm sure you can. Or I'm sure all things, even color and so on. But I know Dr. Monzo was trying to do tests on that, and so he concluded that yes, the frequency or whatever is lower in these polyester clothing, even if it's 100% polyester, if it's man-made, even if it's not mixed, as well as if it's mixed with other things. So that, what was his methodology? I don't remember. Is it reliable? I don't know. I'd encourage people to look into that themselves. Yeah. But I would, one more thing, the kind of left-leaning crowd is now discovering all of the dangers of polyester clothing, specifically being washed and dried in our washers and dryers, and how the microparticles of these plastics are then getting in our air in the HVAC system and or just in the room, and we're inhaling this, which has led to a lot of bad stuff. So that's not a direct, consequence of mixing fabrics. It's just of too much man-made crap. Not enough natural fiber in our diet, but that's all.
Interesting.
Different take there. I just wanted
Here's the other one. Should women wear tzitzit?
Oh my gosh, I have an opinion on this too. But should someone else want to
go?
Well, yes, of course. The reason people say that women shouldn't is because the word ben. Ben, they say, oh, ben is just men. But all of the commandments, almost all, are written toward ben. So, I mean, you're going to have to ask that every time you come across the word. It's definitely a catch-all word for men and women. So, yes, of course. That's my opinion.
I mean, the Jews have never thought that women should wear tzitzit.
Yes.
So what would qualify you to say that they should versus someone who has been raised in 2,000 years of Hebraic tradition?
Well, I would say that they made a mistake thousands of years ago. I also would say they should be wearing blue in their tzitzits. So I would say that it's inconsistent logic to apply the ben word differently for different commandments. So I think it's just less convenient for women, maybe, at least if they're wearing dresses or whatever. I don't know. Maybe I'm totally wrong about this, but that's been my view.
My opinion is, if a woman wants to wear seats, wear your seat. And I'm certainly not going to get up on the throne and tell you that you cannot. And I agree with Luke. It's yes, the term ben is used, but those daughters of Israel are also Israelites too. So, and they can break commandments just as easily as the men can. But that's just my 2 cents.
Yeah. I know that they've been doing a lot of this stuff for a long time. I think they've been doing a lot of things wrong for a long time, though, too. Yeah, that's my opinion. It's same thing with the pseudo-biblia books or whatever.
Pseudepigrapha?
Yeah, just because the book is really old doesn't mean it's not a forgery. Just because it's really old does not mean it's like, just because it was included in the Dead Sea Scrolls doesn't mean it should be part of the living word. But this is a totally different can of worms.
Then let's just go Zadok calendar.
Here's the deal: is that so the Hebrew roots, movement, which is basically what we're talking about. Everyone has an opinion. That's part of I think that's part of our weakness, is that it can be a strength to some degree, but it's also it continually divides us, because we can't quite decide on what is canon. And you watch a video and you're like, oh, that guy made total sense, and then someone else watched a different video and he says, no, that's not right. And then we're all just kind of scrambling around. And I think we have a lot of people walking around that they've watched some videos, but they haven't done the deep study. And so there's something that is missing. Like there's something that there's a low regard for scholarship, I think, within our movement, which I think is a real problem. Because I can tell you, I'm a scholar and I'm just starting to understand some things, like I've been studying for a long time, and I'm like, oh, I think I'm just starting to get this, right? It takes a long time, and it takes just a long time looking at things until you finally just begin to feel, you're like, oh, I understand it, because there's a foundation. And I think this is where I think we just got to be very careful and very humble, and I kind of set you up there about, like why is your opinion valuable or more valuable than, say, the Jews? And I don't always side with the Jews either. I think the rabbis got a number of things wrong, but I always want to be careful to appreciate their perspective and consider their perspective. Doesn't mean I always agree with it, but I think we should be very, very slow to just throw their opinion out wholesale. I think we should consider, anytime we're doing scholarship, we should look at a number of different sources. We should look at a number of different opinions, especially on things like Shatnez or whatever it may be, where we're kind of Johnny come lately to the party on a lot of these different things, or the tzitzit. The Jews have been wearing tzitzit for the last 2,000 plus years. Maybe they might have something to say about this. They might be able to teach us something on this particular topic. The same with the talit and other things that, we might not even know these things had it not been for our Jewish brothers who have been keeping a lot of these things alive. So doesn't mean they're necessarily right, but we got to be careful not to throw under the bus, too fast. Scott.
I was just, but on the tzitzit, it's pretty easy. They don't even put a blue cord because they don't know the proper blue. That would be an example of straining at a gnat to violate the commandment because you're not certain of the type of blue, so you just choose not to even try to obey the commandment. That would,
there's lots of Hebrew rooters that do the very similar kinds of things.
Well, again, I can't control, but I'm just saying, if when you've got a religious system which has white tzitzit, and they don't even and they teach don't put a blue in there because we don't know. They're not even trying to obey the commandment. Royal blue.
It's not actually the case, Scott. Yeah, I hang out with Orthodox Jews, and I walked in with my blues, my tzitzits with techelet, and they said, "Okay, are they certified?" And I said, Here's the certification. And I showed it to them from Israel, and they were so jealous. They wanted to wear blue so badly,
But why won't they?
because it's a clique, it's a group, it's a family.
Religion.
Well, so are we at times. But they were jealous. Oh, they were jealous.
Wow. I mean, maybe this butting of heads between, the newcomers and brother Judah, whatever you want to say, continues until the return of Yeshua. I assume that it will. I don't want to be part of the problem, though. I don't want to be like, I don't want to be saying, you guys don't know what you're doing. No, I would be silly. And you're right. I haven't been doing this forever. I've been doing it just a little while. And so this is just the opinions that I've come to. So that's the thing. I have formed opinions on all this stuff. I'm sure they're not all right, but those are the thoughts that I have.
Okay, so I found Luke a few months ago maybe, when you were doing the calendar wars. You had 4 guys on. They were great guys. They were known messianics, and they discussed the calendars. So what did you come away with? Where did you go? Did you start last Wednesday with the Zadok system? Are you going Hillel 2? Are you Aviv? And when was the new moon? Are you citing it? What are you doing, Luke?
Oh, goodness. Because of that calendar debate, I have kept my perspective. I kept my calendar quiet. I've kept it quiet because as the moderator, I didn't want to be biased one way or the other. I felt like a lot of the guys had good points that they were making, but I have not disclosed my personal preference at this point.
And not tonight.
I do think, well, anyway, yeah, I shouldn't at this point. I'm sure in like another few months or whatever, it won't even matter. It probably doesn't matter now.
Actually, we could probably calculate it out because that would have been about 10 days ago. So you're not celebrating Passover tonight. So you're not on the Zadok.
A little sleuthing there. Yeah, a little sleuthing.
That might be a safe assumption.
Yeah, that's safe.
So he's either on conjunction or sided.
Shoot, you guys are trying to like drill down.
Oh, we're working you. Leading questions. No, we're twisting the arms.
Hey, no matter what I've said about white seats, it could be on LL.
Okay. Wait.
It could be.
Hey, if you're on Hillel, awesome, dude.
But how did you keep those guys friendly and debating? And normally there's a war. Normally it's like, I'll never talk to you again. How did that work out? Why were they so friendly?
Oh, it wasn't me. Most of it was to do with the pre-production. Most of it was the selection of the gentlemen. They were selected, as you do for livestock, for their qualities. And their qualities were being kind and, not pig-headed and not wanting to get their way across. And so that's how we selected the guys. And yeah.
Wow. Well, that's awesome. I mean, that really goes into what Paul talks about in 1 Corinthians 13, and for me, like, that is the paramount. And I know we can get all woo-woo and it's all universal and all this stuff, but I feel like, Paul was a scholar in the Torah. I mean, he knew it front, back, upside down, inside out. He knew the Torah, and he's like, all of that knowledge is a clanging cymbal if I don't have love for my brother. And I just feel, having been in this for a good while, that I want to eat clean and I want to keep the feast, but man, if I do those things and I don't have love, big deal. It's all for nothing. And so I don't know. I guess I'm going to keep coming back to that. No matter how long I stay in this thing, I'm going to keep coming back to this and just saying it's got to be about love. Because if we're not about love, then I think we are completely missing the boat. And
we're breaking one of the commandments. One of the 2 that everything hangs on: loving your neighbor as yourself.
Right.
Yeah. So yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Was that a question, Scott?
No, it's just the hanging thing. It's a good analogy for people to use, like when you do a pull up, You're hanging on it. You're just put this in your feet don't go away. They're still attached to your body. Your knees are still there. Your torso is still there. Everything is just hanging on the greatest commandment to love Yah, second greatest commandment to love others. It doesn't get rid of any of the commandments. And the only thing I would say is something I've been praying about. How do we, knowing that Yah has a very intentional, I think that Luke, this is part of your ministry. He has a very intentional love language for how we're to love him. I believe Christianity gets it right on loving others. And even in spite of all the denominational differences, there's groups and Christian groups that come together and set aside and they just love on each other. And so I guess my question is, how do you balance that? You see a brother that per scripture is sinning, how do you do that, Luke? Do you just let it go, try to talk to a Christian brother about Shabbat or about that this is not food, that it's an abomination, and then if they don't have ears to hear, move on till the next time? Maybe how do you handle that? In other words, being worried for their actions, like that certain actions are sin. So again, we can't change their heart, but you've been at it a little bit longer than me. How do you balance that? What Doug's talking about? I understand what Doug's talking about. Like he'll have somebody that's a shape terrorist come in, and everything has to be about shapes, and then next thing you know, there's a problem in the congregation over shapes because Doug doesn't believe a certain biblical. That would be an example of what Doug has experienced in this movement, or how to pronounce the name, or these books. We're hitting on the big four, the books, the extra books, things of that nature.
Well, maybe the same way that I approach people who don't agree with me in the movement, but slightly different, I guess. Because a lot of these things that people argue about in this movement aren't sin things. They're just how they carry out the commandment. And then a lot of the things I would bump up against in mainstream Christians would be what I would call sin, because they're breaking a law, and the definition of sin is transgressing the commands. So if asked my opinion, I would say, yes, I think this is sin. And that's what we end up getting to. If not asked my opinion, it depends on the situation. Sometimes I'll tell them. Sometimes I'll tell them anyway. Sometimes I won't. But they all know. They all know already what I think. Yeah. Weirdly, I guess in the past I have at some point at least been like, I believe X, Y, and Z are sinning. They're breaking the commandments of God, of Yah. Okay, here's a story. This may be a good example. I had this mobile mechanic that would come and work on my tractor, my horrible tractor. It's still broken. And he would just come in at random whenever he had time, because my tractor's a small potatoes for him. He works on big, heavy machinery. And so when he's going by, he'd stop by. So it's like 8 a.m. or 7:30, and I'm sleeping in because it's Shabbat. And I hear his big boy, truck pulling up. And I'm half asleep. And so he starts already working on the tractor. And I got up and I thought, oh my gosh, I can't let this man work on my tractor on Shabbat. And so I went and I went outside after I washed my face because I just waking up, splash water on my face, wake up, go outside and said, hey, how are you, man? Thank you so much for being here. But you got to know I'm different than most Christians. I keep Saturday as my Sabbath. And if I pay you for coming here to work, I feel as if I am breaking the commandments of God. And I know you may not agree with me there, but I can't, I hope that isn't interrupting you too much, and can you come back another time? And that was the way I did it. I didn't know how to say it, but that's how I said it. And I don't know his level of faith, but that's how I did that.
Well, That's good, and I think you're right. There's no set prescription as to how we do these things. Sometimes it depends on who we're talking to, the scenario. Yeah, I think if we just keep grace, we show grace to people. We may not get it right all the time, and that's okay.
Well,
I was going through Second Chronicles where Hezekiah sent out runners to the people of Manasseh and Ephraim. He says, "Hey, come on to Jerusalem. We're going to celebrate Passover." And so, a lot of them said, that's stupid. But some responded. And so some of the people came from the northern kingdom, which was already disbanded at that point, but some of the remnant. And they came down, and it turns out they were, well, it says ceremonially unclean, but just says they were unclean, And so, Hezekiah prayed, "Oh, good Lord, can you just let it happen this time?" And it says that God listened to his prayer, and they were all received, and they had a great time. They were praising God. And, I think sometimes there's just that sense of, okay, this may not be completely kosher. This may not be completely according to the book, but God remembers that we are dust. And so there's an opportunity for us to invite people in that, or just, to share with others in ways that maybe aren't 100% by the book, but God's good.
Well, and I think that's the key. We can share, but again, it's taken me a while to learn, but we can put these arguments together. But if there's no ears to hear, they're not going to hear this. And we definitely don't need to necessarily divide with our Baptist or Presbyterian or solid. And I'm talking about solid Bible teaching Christian brothers and sisters. I mean, they haven't. They've been taught that what we're talking about is Jewish, and I do think that's Luke. That project I'd like to work with you on. I think it could help open some eyes and some ears if they just understood. Wait a minute, I'm an Israelite. Then it's easy stuff. It really is. Now we're going to quibble about some of these quibbly things. That's what I like to call them, like calendar quibbles. But I think how we quibble is more important than being 100% correct. So.
Yeah.
Well said. We should make a documentary, or I'd love for you to make us a documentary on Commonwealth theology. We'll think of a snappier title, but to help people understand how the two houses, like what happened, that whole story, because that is, I think, the missing link in Christian theology. I think all of us would probably agree with that this is the missing link in Christian theology. We can touch on Marcion. There's like so many topics that if we could just help people understand this bigger picture, I think it would open a lot of eyes. And, and then let the Holy Spirit lead them where they need to. But if we could just help them to see this whole different thing, because then we're not coming at it from a perspective of, hey, you should be keeping Torah, right, quote unquote. But it's now they understand, oh, I'm Israel. Oh, well, of course I want to keep Torah, right? And how we do that is another question. But that they first identify with who they are, and then they can understand what they need to do, right? I think we could take those baby steps. It'd be pretty awesome. So I'm hoping to put a bug in your ear and enlist you.
I think that's why I don't know if you saw Jim Staley's Identity Crisis, but that's why it was so huge, I think, because it mapped that out, at least from the stage. So I guess the documentary would have to do that in a different way. Yeah. And
did you work with Jim Staley at all on his projects?
No, I haven't.
Okay.
We did an interview for this live podcast, and then I met him and interviewed him before, but we haven't worked on anything.
Okay.
Awesome. Wow.
Wait, I have one more thing. I have one more thing to say about that conversation we were having about witnessing to your brethren.
Yeah.
I have found a bad way to do it, and that is, sorry, there's like a motorcycle driving by. The bad way to do it is to not be consistent in your own beliefs in front of people. If you say that you eat clean and you keep Passover, then do that. And if you break your own rules, they won't understand how they should be treating you, and they probably will lose respect for you. So I would say, if you are convinced of this stuff, do it and be consistent. And the other thing I would say is tell them ahead of time. Like if you're going to go on a trip with someone and it's going to be Shabbat, map out how you do those things, how you keep Shabbat. If you're going to be anywhere around non-Torah people during any of the feast days, definitely map that out too. And then they'll have fair warning and they'll know, oh, this guy's crazy, but at least I know what he's going to do and not going to do. And nothing has to be a surprise. So, yeah.
That's great advice. That's very good advice. Yeah. Yeah. Be consistent, right? And I guess find your own red line and don't go beyond it. That's good. That's very good.
Wow.
I was just
just real quick, my buddy Jeff had a great question, Doug. I think I've told it to you before, or a great answer when people would ask him. He was the leader of the fellowship I attended. When people would ask him, well, can I do this on Shabbat, or can I do this on this feast day or something? He'd say, look, read the scriptures. I do not want to be your Pharisee. And so I thought that was a great way to not be the answer man to everything that a person can or cannot do on Shabbat. Just let them get along with scripture, let them get along with the word, let them read the word, and then let them just, decide, and they can have that discussion, with the servant leader. They can have that discussion with other brothers, but it's really going to be more between them and Yah as to how they guard and honor the Sabbath. So, because I'm sure people would differ with others on what is considered work.
So the question was, from me, is Passover a gateway drug into what we do? I mean, is that the start? Should we use that as a ministry tool to bring people into Messianic faith? I mean, this guy is saying, well, 20 unbelievers were very interested in learning this weekend about Pesach and things like that. I mean, should we? I personally view it as a family activity, not a churchian activity, and that there are other ways to minister to people and tell them about Sabbath and other things like that, rather than using Pesach to do that, because I just think it should be more kept with family. What do you think?
Me?
Yeah.
Well, I agree with you that it seems like the idea is to keep it with family, but I also see how it is the most familiar and easy to approach feast for the mainstream Christian audience, because they see it every Easter in their cantata, and the Passover is mentioned. It's mentioned in all the Gospels. They're like, oh, Pesach, Passover. Oh, great. I think that seems like Jesus was doing this maybe, or his disciples cared about this. Like he told them to get it ready. So there must be some kind of good understanding in it. And so they want to have that understanding without having the understanding of I am Israel yet, but they want to kind of. So I mean, we are this year for the first time there's like a local church that wants to do Passover with their congregation, but they just want to walk through what it's like, not even on Passover.
Right.
And
see,
so we are. It's not on Passover because that's more of a close thing for me, but on a different day that's not, we are going to walk through them and say this is what is normally done and blah, blah, blah. So, yeah.
I've gone into Lutheran groups and said, here's what we do. It's not Jewish. This is godly. And so, but I didn't do it on Passover.
Yeah. I guess that would be,
because they're not really keeping Passover. They're not interested in that. They're just interested in learning a few nuggets and moving on with their lives.
And this year we're actually getting together as a community for the first day of unleavened bread. That's when we're commanded to gather, and we're fitting it in right before sundown. So on the 14th.
That's cool. Wow.
I think it's a wonderful gateway drug, and I encourage people to do it. If you want to do it with your family, go do it with your family. If you want to join something. A lot of people have never experienced this. They have no idea what to do, even though you don't have to do a big shenanigan. But for a lot of people, it's something that they have no clue what to do. And so it's nice when someone can hold them by the hand and say, here's some really nice things. Like when we go through it, we obviously talk about coming out of Egypt, but we talk a lot about Jesus. We talk about how some of these things are traditions that go back to the time of Jesus, and some of the things that he was doing. You got the three matzot, and the middle one was the afikomen. And so when Jesus took that piece of matzah, he probably took the afikomen. He probably broke that one. Half of it was hidden. There's so much symbolism that if you just do it by yourself and you've never done it, you're not going to understand a lot of the different things. And so when you can go and it's kind of like dinner theater, you're like, this is kind of fun, And I tell you what, we always get the hottest horseradish sauce we can get. This year we're getting atomic horseradish, which we actually had last year. A couple years ago, we had like the weakest, wimpiest horseradish. And I was like, I'm not even suffering. It's not even fun. And so last year we got atomic horseradish sauce. I was crying. It was beautiful. Right. But it was so much fun. It was so much fun to do it together. It was really fun to do it as a community. And, it's just a special time. So again, this is where we all have different perspectives on things. And I know that Scott and I differ a little bit on this one as to when it actually starts. But, but that's okay. Right. And I think God's like, okay, you guys hash it out, but whatever. Even the debate on, okay, was Jesus celebrating Passover or not? Oh my goodness, there's like a zillion opinions on these things. And this is where we just have to have that humility and say, okay, I have my perspective. You've got your perspective. Can we still be brothers on this? And that's what it's going to come down to. Like Scott's talking about, quibbles. It's not so much whether we quibble or not, but how we do it. What's the spirit in which we quibble? All right. And if we can have a spirit of, okay, we can disagree very agreeably, and we can keep the fellowship, we can keep the unity, even if we have different perspectives, that will make a huge difference. When I was in Israel, I could not believe how noisy it was when I went to a Beit Midrash, a house of study. And, I was told that they were studying the Bible. And I'm like, how is this a Bible study? Everyone's talking. They're all seem to be arguing and everything. And yet I realized that they were all in a very passionate discussion over the scriptures. And turns out they all came out friends and nobody was hitting each other and nobody got excommunicated, because it's okay to have passion. We Americans are not really good at this. We tend to say, well, okay, if you're going to think that, I'm going to take my ball and go home. And that's the last we see of one another, because we were taught that if you have a doctrine, like this is a salvation issue for most things. And so if you don't have the right doctrines, well, you're probably going to hell, and I don't want to be associated with you. And that's kind of how I was raised. So I think if we can kind of detach ourselves a little bit and say, okay, it's okay to have differences of opinions, especially when it comes to Passover and all these things. I think if we can show that unity to our Sunday non-feast keeping brothers, and they'll be like, wow, this is pretty cool. And hopefully they'll get the spirit of it and get excited about it, and God will do amazing things. Yeah. Well, Luke, thank you so much for coming on. This was awesome. Where can people get The Way documentary if they want to check that out?
Oh, they can go to thewaydoc.com. DOC like documentary. The Way
Nice.
Doc.
Nice.
And we have the podcast, which Scott was almost most recently, the Life podcast on YouTube.
Nice. Very cool. Well, thank you again. This was awesome. Everyone, thank you for joining us. We're so glad, as always. Make sure to like, subscribe, and all that stuff. Share it with somebody. Till next time, God bless, and have a great Passover, no matter when you celebrate.